leaving and going to work. So they're no longer at home. We think a lot of this is due to the transition back to in-person from pandemic rules. We have made a couple of significant arrests, however, and you can see on the stats, if you look at the month to month across the year, in August, we had a spike in commercial burglaries, and we're able to identify a group of suspects that were coming up from Seattle. They have been committing all along the Aurora corridor. So we made arrests as far up as into Edmonds as well, being able to identify the main suspect. Another significant arrest that we made was in October, where again, you'll see a drop as soon as we made the arrest for a burglar that has been doing the same MO since I was a detective back in the day, cutting through drywall of businesses and going in and finding safes and cash registers to take. So these significant arrests that we were able to make have made a big impact. Again, as the chief had mentioned, we've redeployed our traffic unit just to cover the patrol spots that we have. However, we've been able to keep our CID and set detectives in place and keep their our community outreach officer in place as well, just so that we can make a bigger impact on these particular type of crimes against people. So we're doing our best. The numbers are definitely increasing, however. And speaking to traffic collisions, 2021, we were at 361. It's a slight increase overall from 2020, but remains relatively low. We had to redeploy our traffic unit. We have a traffic unit of one, Sergeant Charlie Akers, who we all know is out there doing as much as he possibly can as a single unit and running a patrol shift every single day. His main focus has been on our abandoned vehicle issues, however, so hitting issues with regards to speed and other traffic problems, we don't have a unit to deploy. Our patrol units are doing their best to go out and respond to complaints that we had. We got a lot of feedback at National Night Out with regards to different areas and different neighborhoods that people wanted to see more activity, and we responded to that immediately as well. We're prioritizing those 911 calls. That's the fact that we don't have our traffic enforcement unit. And as we can continue to build up our staffing, we're going to get that unit back up and running as soon as possible. Traffic citations issued decreased from 1,347 in 2020 to 408. We don't have people out there that are even able to do traffic stops and write tickets. So that's a 92% decrease from 2017 overall.
I'm going to talk about traffic ticket analysis by race. And this is something that we had some of the public brought up to us, and it was something that we were able to research more. We had never been able to really look into it as much as we did. So well, myself, but really Christina, our city, and the city manager's office did a ton of work on this analysis. And so this is focusing on 2020 and 2021. And this only is in relation to police initiated, so on-view traffic stops. In 2020, of the people licensed in Shoreline who were identified as Black and were cited 22 times, 8 of those times were considered crimes of poverty. And we talk about crimes of poverty, we're talking about defective equipment, failing to renew license tabs or expired registration, failure to transfer title, maybe driving without insurance or a valid driver's license. And then in 2021, of the people licensed in Shoreline who were identified as Black, they were cited 8 times. And of those 8, 2 of them were considered crimes of poverty. The city manager and myself met with Dr. Armandson along with several other members of the community. And we spoke with them about the disproportionate ticketing of Black individuals that has occurred. And that's demonstrated in the data that we provided. And we acknowledge that this has not only occurred in 2020 and 2021, but also in years prior based on data brought to our attention by the community members. This has caused a disproportionate harm to our Black community members. The city manager, as well as myself and whoever is selected as the chief, are committed to continue to take steps to change this trend going forward, as we recognize sticking with the same practices and policies would reinforce the historical complicity in maintaining overall the structural racism. And this is something that the sheriff's office continues to talk about as well, with training and other things that we continue to focus on to make sure that we're always looking for new avenues to go with it and new training opportunities that are out there, and our officers are all on board to do just that. So that's what we'll continue to do in the future and going forward.
I get to speak a little bit about our radar program. I was fortunate enough in 2016 to be part of this program as we got it kicked off and actually functioning. It's been pretty amazing to see how much it's grown. We are now partnered with 5 municipalities total. So Bothell, Kirkland, Lake Forest Park, Kenmore, and us here in Shoreline, which has created a force multiplier to be able to deal with these mental and behavioral health issues in the community on more of a partnership and collaborative effort. The stats that you see here are overall for all 5 municipalities, but I wanted to break down a little bit what that actually looks like as far as service to Shoreline. Overall, there were 978 contacts for 2021 that radar made. So navigator and police partnership going out and making contacts in the community. But of those 978, 514 of those interactions were here in Shoreline alone. We've serviced a lot of people. Our breakdown percentage wise, 20% of the folks that we communicated with and interacted with had major significant behavioral health issues to address. 35% of those folks were homeless that we were dealing with. And our navigator has been able to link 35% of those people that we dealt with community services. So they've done some fantastic work. We've been working with Svetlana here. She meets with and partners with our deputies twice a week. It's been a great partnership and continues to grow. And again, it's just been pretty impressive to see how much this program has grown and the impact that we've been able to make over the years since we kicked this off in 2016.
Our final slide before we take questions is on use of force. And the total details that we went to our calls for services, 23,430. And out of those 23,430, we made 748 arrests. Out of all of those arrests, only 10 times was forced use, which is 0.043%. 5 of those was some type of pain or injury, complaint of pain or injury by the person. And 5 of them, there was no complaint of pain or injury, but it still met the mark where we needed to document it as what we call a use of force report and do all the documentation for it. A little bit more of a breakdown of the 5 that did result in pain or injury. 2 were a complaint of pain after being tased. 1 was a control hold that resulted in a complaint of pain, and 2 were a hand or elbow strike. And there is more information on the attachment B, which is in the police service report to review as well. That concludes our PowerPoint presentation, and we would love to open up for any questions that we can answer.
Questions or comments from council? Councilmember Ramsdell.
Yeah, thank you so much for that presentation. Excellent. There's a lot of statistics that really kind of surprised me. Often perception is different than reality when you look at the data. So I really appreciate that excellent presentation. I'm kind of wondering in terms of like the commercial burglaries, was there any particular sector of the business or business economy that was hit harder than other sectors? Was it restaurants?
Not really. Aurora was the most significant area hit for both of the 2 specific cases that I cited. And generally speaking, that's where we're usually hit hardest.
Captain, can you get a little closer to your mic?
Oh, absolutely. Sorry about that. Is that better?
Yeah.
Okay, fantastic. So Aurora is generally the hot spot for us, and that's why we were able to track up into Edmonds as well. Some veered off into Montlake Terrace, so we had a bit of activity off of 15th as well, but the majority of our burglaries occurs on Aurora.
Thank you. Other questions or comments?
Yeah, of course. Thank you so much. You know, with the data that we have, it tells a story, and people have different understanding of interpreting data when it's presented to them. And looking at it, I think my biggest concern will be the vacancies. Yeah, I think you're swamped and looking at how you have the increase in burglaries and all that to keep our city safe. I'm not sure what you can do at this time to get those filled, and it's becoming more of a concern. However, I just want to show and tell how impressed I am with the response time, especially with Priority X. based on how low staffed you are and still continuing to do your best. So just want to appreciate that. I was just wondering, maybe it's just for the meeting purpose, why you just decided to show the BIPOC community statistics, even though you show the rest, but just to talk about that. But I felt it was necessary to talk about everything, because it's just information that you are presenting, not just to, seclude that. So that's what I thought.
Thank you so much for bringing up those questions. The first one talking about recruiting. And now that we have Sheriff Patty Cole-Tyndall at the Sheriff's Office, actually recruiting has been going really well. We've got a full-time recruiter back again. He's been doing great work. We've actually had some pretty great and great for us, at least when I see these lists of new names that are coming in that are filling up our lists of people that want to still work for the police department and want to work for the Sheriff's Office, and then getting the new people in that are coming to Shoreline as well. We have a great training environment for new officers because of the support that we have, the busy area at times, and also we have the city part, but we also have the neighborhoods and a lot of neighborhoods that work close together. And it's great to train the new officers out here. I know when Captain Park was out here as well, you were involved directly with the training stuff when you were here.
I was.
And I know that people enjoy coming out here and training. So we're getting a lot of, I won't say a lot, but we definitely have several new officers that are coming on. We've got another one that just starts, I think in about a
Wednesday, actually.
Wednesday. So we got another one. So we are constantly starting to see a trickle. It's a slow trickle, but we will take it at this point. Any trickle is good considering.
I had 7 brand new officers, 2 of them being laterals last Friday, and one of our post-Belia classes. We're getting the young man on Wednesday. He was very excited to come up here. Other folks were jealous that he was getting to. So that says a lot about our contract, I think, and word spreads pretty quickly. People want to come and work here. It's a matter of being able to spread the love a little bit and make sure that we're covering the entire department, however. So it's a bit of a chess game when it comes to trying to get folks here that put in their transfer request and making sure that we're not bleeding any particular area too thin within the county.
So thank you for that question. I think the other question had to do with the traffic data. Is that right? Sorry, I had a little trouble hearing. Just go to the traffic data here. Just one of the last slides. And I'm sorry, Councilmember Povey, I couldn't hear you too well. The question
It's related to the traffic ticket analysis that you did, and that's on slide number 8.
Right. Okay, got it.
Yeah. Because the city is all inclusive, and so when we are looking at a topic that is related to the safety of every resident, it should be general. So I was just wondering why that was just singled out.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yes. And we actually we did the analysis, as you can see on the graph, specifically to all different types of races that live here in the city. And there's a lot more into it just because we were trying to make it a little bit of a snapshot of the presentation. And we've had more people. There was looking at the numbers, the Black population, the numbers were higher for ticketed. And so we were trying to bring that out, but that doesn't take away from any other race that we have on there. And again, if you read the police service report, it really goes into a ton of detail with each thing. We were just trying to get a snapshot out there for people to see, just a real brief explanation of everything.
All right, thank you. Mayor, one more. Cool. All right. I love the radio program and how I just love the partnership. Can you just give us a success story, whereas there was that collaboration? Because people have different understanding, how can the police and the mental health profession work together that way? Can you tell us just 1 or 2 success stories where there've been great partnership?
No, absolutely. The original idea that retired Captain Strathy had for the radar program was to increase officer safety and increase safety to the public. I think one of the most significant success stories that I personally witnessed was an individual. Every single time that we were called to his group home, he was violent, and we ended up having to use force to deal with him. The problem is we had 2 solutions that long ago. You go to the hospital or you go to jail. We were able to tier that individual, make sure that they got on a proper treatment plan and were seen by a regular therapist. it made a significant difference. And in doing that, being able to get him leveled out, his name was Sean, we were able to build more of a relationship with him, find out what his hooks were, what he liked. It was Black Panther at the time. So we would be able to strike up a conversation with him when we got there. He knew us by name, and we didn't have to have any more uses of force with him. It was amazing to see the turnaround in that individual. We had another individual years ago who was collecting shopping carts, being a significant nuisance just off of 15th Northeast. We were able to connect her with community services. She was homeless at the time, able to get her housing. And that made the area that was being affected, the commercial business district over there, and then some residential as she bled deeper into the neighborhood over there. Got excellent feedback from the community from that. She got the help that she needed, and that nuisance was no longer an issue. And it was a very expensive endeavor every time that we had to go out there and clean up. Took city resources. We had to use our Brugger's Bog to hold on to her property. It was very expensive. We were able to take care of that as well. So helped multiple different areas of the city, and pretty neat to see.
Thank you, Chief and Captain. Thank you,
Thank
Mayor.
you. Thank you. Councilmember Mork.
Thank you, Mayor. And Councilmember Poby's excellent introduction. I couldn't agree with more. Under the circumstances, just so happy that you've been able to keep the program going as well as it has been, and with the difficulties with all the vacancies. And again, thank you so much for your efforts on that. And I also really appreciate the radar program, and thank you so much to give us some stories. That was really helpful. But my question is about vandalism, and wondering if there is why that seems to be going up, and if there is any thoughts that you might have on things the city could do to lessen that. Thank you.
Yeah.
Okay. Speaking directly to the vandalism that we're having and graffiti, retired Sergeant Paul Klein, that was a passion that he had, and he went at every single graveyard shift and cleaned the graffiti up himself. Oftentimes he did not take a police report when he did this. We actually don't believe that there's been an increase. It's just the fact that he was taking care of the problem himself and not drafting a police report for every single one of these. We've seen a big increase in the parks because of that. So we have done what we can to up our park patrols. Our entire second and graveyard shifts are both on rotations to make sure that they're hitting their individual parks every single night. As soon as we see the graffiti or we see an issue, we have a direct line of communication to Nick. Nick gets a crew out there first thing in the morning and gets it cleaned up. And we even had an incident of some hate graffiti that was put at Cromwell Park about a month ago, just before a wedding, and called out one of the CRT crew to take care of it. He handled it in less than an hour. So the communication is good. We're doing our best to get around to these problem areas, but Paul Klein was a one-man show and took care of a lot of it for us. So we're seeing the numbers up because now we're actually taking police reports on it.
Thank you.
Other questions or comments? Well, I'm going to make up for my fellow council members' brevity because I have a few. I want to just touch base on a couple of things. First of all, the vacancies. We had a push for quite a while to make our police force look roughly like our community. And I think we did great at that. We had a police force that wasn't all young white men. And right now, the focus is on getting qualified people in here, sort of regardless of what they look like. But I don't want us to lose sight of that, because I think there's value in a number of ways to having that. There's value in interactions with the community. There's value in trust. There's all those things.
Absolutely.
12 out of 51 positions open, for me, is crisis level. I mean, this is a problem. And on this side of the dais, we can do two things. We can throw money at it, and we can work within the established political system, because the sheriff's department is bigger than just Shoreline, to make sure that we are getting folks here. And I know everybody else is doing that too, but don't hesitate to use us on either one of those things. If we need transfer bonuses, talk to us about that, even outside of the contract. If we need someone to say, hey, why did Metro get 7 officers when we got 1?
Right.
That's what we do, right? That's what we can do. So as far as I'm concerned, this is the time. And I heard the good news tonight. That's great. And thank you for that. But this is the time to start pulling out the stops on that, because that's the biggest thing that this city has in terms of public safety trust is that officers show up. And if we get to the point where they can't, that's a big problem.
For sure.
On that note, thank you for de-emphasizing ACH, because the level of service we expect is if someone calls 911, a police officer shows up.
Yes.
Yeah.
And there have been times in my life when I didn't want them to. If I was just reporting something, I knew, I was going to send it into insurance or whatever. As an alternative, that's fine. But thank you, and I encourage you to keep that going with that. The race data, I've been pushing for a couple of things for years prior to both of you being on the council, anybody but Councilmember Roberts, I think. And I'm still hoping we'll eventually get those. One is stop data as opposed to citation data, because there are so many factors that go into whether a ticket is written. And for me, it's hard to pull that apart. It's hard to figure out if there really is a bias problem there, given that you've got a whole bunch of stuff going on. Whereas stops, those other than the crimes of poverty stuff, other than malfunctioning vehicles, if you're pulling someone over for speeding, it's a target-rich environment, right? I mean, there's discretion in who you select, and so why are you picking a particular person?
Right.
I suspect that if there is a disparity there, and I bet there is, it's subconscious. I mean, it's something under the radar, but we don't know that because we don't have the data.
Right.
And what I've hit with previous police command staff is, well, it's hard to get, and it relies on officer perception. But for me, the officer perception is the point. So if the officer misdiagnoses a Pacific Islander as an African-American, fine. What we want to know is, I think I'm pulling over African-Americans 35% of the time. Why is that happening? Right. So that's the next question. So that's not as much of a priority as getting qualified police officers on the street, for sure. But for me, that's still a high priority, because I don't know enough from this citation data to know if there is a problem. Sorry, I do know there's a problem. I don't know what kind of a problem it is yet. And the other thing I've been pushing for is that none of us in this room take the lead in handling that. You two know more about it than the rest of us do, but none of us are experts in picking apart institutional racism, right? And this is a council and a city that is willing to take that problem seriously. And to the extent we can get outside consultants, I mean, we're not the first city to look at this, right? And I bet you some city somewhere has done some groundbreaking work on it. Not necessarily your jobs to find that, but I've encouraged Debbie to do it. And I hope if you do know somebody, throw the name forward and we'll see what we can do. Because like I said, it's a problem whenever there's a disproportionality between population and citation. But what kind of a problem, where it comes from, I don't know.
Right.
How are we doing on mail theft? I didn't see a statistic on that.
We haven't had a significant increase. Really, it hasn't been as big a problem as it has been, in past years. It's pretty rare that we have an issue with that.
That certainly is the most common complaint just on neighborhood chat. There's not a lot we can do about it, but that leads to a surprisingly high level of outrage. And I don't know what we can do about that other than encouraging people to get locking mailboxes, but that's the thing I see the most on social media as a complaint.
Yeah, that's true. I see it on social media as well. You're right.
So finally, radar. So excited about that. Again, it's a giant step forward. And these folks are tired of hearing me say this, but you two are new. So my personal take on that, I was a paramedic as a first career in the 90s, and I can't, the calls I remember most are the mental health calls, behavioral health calls, where there was usually an engine company, there was the two of us, a couple police officers, and we all sat around looking at each other. Who's going to deal with this? You know, and somebody would step up. And honestly, it was 6 to 1 as to whether it was a firefighter, a police officer, or a paramedic, and we all just sort of did it catch as catch can. And I made some mistakes in my 20s, and like looking back on it, I'm like, oops, that wasn't the right thing, you know?
Right.
So my hope is that we end up with 4 emergency services, police, fire, EMS, and then mental health responders who do sort of nothing but that. And what we've got right now is the co-responder model. That's a great start, but I am looking not to force multiply, but to sort of force replace. So the police officers are there for those few calls, and there will always be those few calls when use of force is required. We need you for that. But that otherwise, you don't need to deal with this anymore. There's somebody who is qualified to do this and who only does this. So I'm excited about that. We've got some significant amount of money in our levy lid lift proposal to what I hope will be to fully fund it and fully fund it as a career. So you may not make exactly what a police officer does, but it's a career. It's not a part-time job. It's not a catch as catch can. And the final thing, the other big hole in it, as you well know, is we don't have a receiving facility. So it's hospital, home, or jail, not mental health crisis center.
Right.
And no, not any of us, certainly not me, but there's some tremendous strides being made in that. State funding and county funding, a lot of folks are looking at it, and we're working with cities on the north end to figure out where we would put one up here. And we're pushing hard to make sure there is one up here, because that, honestly, after the lack of qualified field people, is the biggest problem.
Yeah.
Right.
Great.
And as I've said to previous command staff, I mean, we're committed to having a responsible, progressive police force. We're also committed to making sure that crime stays solid. And if you need something, don't hesitate to ask. The only thing that's ever been asked is motorcycles for the trail. Like, okay.
And they're great and they're very well used. So we appreciate that.
Especially
All right. All right. Any other questions or comments from council? All right. Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you, council.
Next up is study item 8B, which is a discussion of the wastewater rate study updates. And I believe we have Ms. Lane and Mr. Witt, who looks like they're remotes.
Yes, good evening, Mayor, Council. We are pleased to be back with another update on the wastewater study. This one is focusing on our general facility charge calculation. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Mr. Tagi Acker, who you have heard from before, and he will present the details on this. When he is finished, I will come back and revisit a couple policy items that we discussed last time we were with you. So Mr. Gordon Wilson is also with us, and he is available for questions as well when we are through. So with that, take it away, Mr. Acker.
Thank you, Sarah. Can you guys see that okay?
Yes.
All right. So this is the third presentation in a series of presentations that we've given this year regarding the rate study. The first was back in April. We talked mostly about policy issues, not necessarily looking at any results. Just a couple of weeks ago in July, we looked at the ongoing rates and how they compared with what the forecast was for covering your operating and capital expenditures. And then today we're talking about the general facilities charges. And before we get into the results, wanted to note the figures that you'll see today are the maximum allowable charges. By policy, the council could adopt something less than what we show, could phase into these levels over multiple years. So just wanted to note that coming into the presentation. And then as a little bit of a note there, we've previously calculated these charges for what was Ronald Wastewater District. And the main focus of tonight's presentation will be to show what's allowable for cities and what that change does to those calculated charges. So we'll provide some background, some legal items. We'll show you what the calculation is. And we've also put together a GFC survey that shows how your local GFCs compare to others in the region. So as I alluded to a couple of slides ago, these are one-time charges, not to be confused with the ongoing base charges that customers pay on a monthly basis. And as growth occurs, they provide revenue for capital projects. So really in the way that we calculate these charges and the way they are to be used, focus specifically on funding capital projects. We take into account in the calculation both what you've already put into place, the existing assets. We also look 20 years into the future based on the comprehensive planning efforts to include those projects that are planned to be completed in the future. And the whole goal of these charges, these general facilities charges or GFCs, is to recover that proportionate share of the cost of providing capacity so that as new customers connect to the system, they're getting on par with customers that have connected in the past and have been paying ongoing rates. So in terms of what you are allowed to do legally, we put the revised Code of Washington RCW up on the screen there. There's not a lot of detailed methodology text here in the RCW, but what is called out is it's got to be an equitable share. You can include interest on top of the cost of those projects already put into place and projects planned to be completed. One key difference between what was allowed for the district and what's allowed for cities is that we were capped at 10 years of capital projects looking forward for districts, cities do not have that limitation per the RCW. So we're looking at the full 20-year plan in this update. And no mention of excluding grant-funded or donated facilities, but when we could identify those assets that were grant-funded or funded by developers and then donated to the city, we tried to exclude those to be conservative. So that's a little bit of the background, and now we'll get into the results of the GFC study. So currently, the city's citywide GFC is just over $3,000 per RCE. That's residential customer equivalent. And that's what was calculated for Ronald Wastewater District. Looking at 20 years of future capital, along with a few other adjustments that have occurred over the past year, the updated charge would be $4,351 per RCE. So that takes into account the existing cost basis of about $40 million. Looking forward at 20 years of capital projects, that would add about $97 million divided by estimated system capacity at that time, just over 31,000 residential customer equivalents. That's how we came up with the $4,351. And that's the citywide GFC. That's to recover collection, conveyance related costs. In addition to that, there's the Edmonds treatment facilities GFC, currently $2,505 per RCE. With the updated methodology and updated data, that's going to be $3,377 per RCE. That takes existing plus future, it's about $9.5 million, divided by those RCEs flowing towards the Edmonds wastewater treatment plant. And that's how we came up with that updated charge. For those customers that flow towards the King County transmission line, they pay a separate wastewater capacity charge for King County, and that's equivalent to just over $12,000. So just as a comparison there. So a few key drivers from the work that we did about a year ago to what we have shown you in this updated presentation here tonight. We're looking at 20 years of capital, and we've also updated those cost estimates to be in 2021 dollars. A year ago, those cost estimates were provided to us in 2020 dollars. And we've also incorporated any assets that have been completed in 2021, adding an additional year of interest on eligible assets. And then we took a look at customer data and updated that. So in summary, based on the city's current citywide charge, the calculated maximum would be about a $1,300 increase. For the Edmonds treatment facilities, that GFC would represent an increase of just under $900. So as a reminder, this is the calculated maximum defensible GFC that the city could implement. Certainly up to the council by policy could adopt something less than that or even phase into that over time. In terms of how the city's current citywide charge compares to others, you can see Shoreline there just over $3,000. So below the middle, towards the bottom, with the updated maximum charge, that would put Shoreline above these jurisdictions here, but still well below these 5 jurisdictions at the top of that comparison group. And all of these jurisdictions are served by King County Wastewater Treatment Division, so they would also be subject to that $12,000 treatment capacity charge. This is just showing the local collection charges for these cities and districts in the region. So in summary, before we turn it back to Sarah, I just want to repeat what we've talked about a couple of slides ago. Just want the council to consider adopting the middle column here, or at least taking steps to phase towards that calculated maximum over a, say, multi-year phasing period. And with that, I'll transition to the next slide, and Sarah will take this one.
Great, thank you. So council, on July 25th, we talked about some fee reinstatement policies, and there were some questions that were raised during that discussion. And your questions brought up some great information. So I wanted to just quickly talk. This was all included in the staff report, but there had been a question about our credit card processing fee and the number of or percentage of credit cards that were paid or bills that were paid with credit card. And in the process of answering that, we realized that we had made an error in our original calculation and had included, or we had actually excluded a lot of payments that are made through ACH. And so that had skewed our data. So I have changed our staff recommendation, which originally I had recommended that we not reinstate the fee, since it appeared that credit cards were the predominant payment methodology, but now recognizing that they are not, I do recommend that we reinstate that and that we keep an eye on it. So when that balances, we would come back with a change. Regarding, there was also a question or concern voiced around our refund request fee, which I had recommended that we do reinstate that $11 fee. And the concern was voiced that it possibly would be perceived as just a bureaucratic hoop, and was it really necessary? And upon further consideration, and as I shared in the staff report, it is to a certain extent a bureaucratic hoop and it's very useful for accounts where they can take that credit on their next bill. And the cost of processing those refunds is significant, yet the $11 fee doesn't cover that, but it does act as a deterrent in those cases. However, on the cases where the account is being closed, then we would, I think our thought was we could waive those fees, that people who do not have the option to use the credit in a future account, that we shouldn't charge them $11 to get their feedback. And then the final one was just an option. It was concerned that perhaps we were being a little too lenient by not charging interest, and could we possibly charge interest on those accounts that are sort of the most severe. And so the option I would present for consideration, and in talking to our collections attorney, thought that this was very doable, would be that we would charge interest only on accounts that are sent to collections that don't implement and comply with a payment agreement. So if somebody is sent to collections, they wouldn't right off the bat be charged interest if they entered into a payment agreement and complied with that. So those were updates to the policy, and I'm happy to answer any questions council have, but otherwise we would be incorporating these policy changes in our recommendations and bring back a code change around the interest for council discussion and consideration. And all of these would be implemented in 2023. And so with that, we will open it up for general questions about anything that you have heard this evening.
Councilmember Poby.
Thank you, Ms. Ling. Just clarification, if my memory serves me right, you recommended the elimination of credit card processing fee because you wanted to encourage online payments. Is that right?
That was the thought, that when we have a new credit card processing capabilities, that we would be able to encourage that and not discourage it. The reality is right now it's a very small percentage, because our credit card online credit card processing is very clunky, and it's something we'll be requesting in the upcoming budget to implement a new module that will make that more streamlined. So my thought is we would revisit this after we implement that that tool at the time.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions or comments from council? Councilmember Roberts.
Thank you, Mayor. Just a couple of questions here. So the capital improvement plan, if I'm reading correctly, assumes a 41% increase in residential customer equivalents over the next 20 years. Is that correct? And that's how this rate is being calculated.
I believe that 41% figure is based on population estimates incorporated into the comprehensive planning effort. So yeah, I think you're on the right track there.
Okay, so that's the growth that this capital improvement plan is expecting, and these GFCs, general facility charges, are going to be imposed only on new development, just for clarification.
Yeah, new development, or in the case of redevelopment, that incremental capacity required of new development would see a GFC.
Okay, and then the last question is, this report and the staff recommendation is to change and to make consistent that the general facility charges are going to be based on the King County model rather than our existing single family, multifamily commercial distinction. Is that correct?
I think for the report that's in the packet was a report that we had put together a year ago specific to the district. Since assumption, I believe the city has aligned its RCE definition for the purposes of calculating the general facilities charge with the way that King County currently defines the RCE.
Okay, so
That's
it's no longer a one-on-one for a multifamily development. King County is, I think the RCE is like 0.63 per unit. And that's what Shoreline has currently, is what you're saying.
Yes.
Okay. So thank you for the clarifications on those questions. I think it's important that we recognize that the growth is paying for growth here. And I do support the staff recommendations on the policy issues that have been brought forward today. Thank you, Mayor.
Thank you. Councilmember Moore.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for the presentation. I really appreciated it. My questions are similar to my colleague, my previous colleague, in trying to understand the RCE. Did the definition of RCE change between when it was modeled and now that it's been assumed? Is it still the same number or is it different?
I can address that, Tug. For the record, my name is Gordon Wilson. I'm with FCS Group. King County changed its definitions relevant to the RCE 2 or 3 years ago. And the biggest of those changes had to do with dividing up a single family home into large, medium, and small. So only the medium is 1.0 RCE. The large is bigger than that, and the small is less than that. But there are also some relatively small adjustments to the RCE values assigned to multifamily the plexes, and also to the 5 or more units per building apartments. So there were some changes made. The district, as part of adopting the updated RCE, reconnected to the King County definitions, and then the city took on those definitions. So you're already connected to King County. The only thing just for everyone, I know you understand this, but I'm going to state this clearly for everybody else's sake. The RCE for the purposes of calculating capacity charge is different than the RCE used in rates, monthly rates. We're talking about the one used for capacity charges or general facilities charges. Before you know how much wastewater usage there is.
Thank you. I think that's really helpful. And again, I appreciate Councilmember Roberts reminding us all it's growth paying for growth. And I think that is really important for us all to keep in mind. And I too am grateful for the staff's reevaluation of the 3 policies, and I agree with them. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments from council? All right, what's the next steps, Ms. Lane?
So the staff will be working with the FCSG as we evaluate supplemental requests to determine the final rates. So we will be bringing back recommendations to you for the final rates to support both our operating and the GFC through the budget process. And then there will be a separate code change that will come separately before the end of the year around that interest change that we've recommended. And the rest of the policies we'll do administratively.
Fantastic. Thank you all very much. That concludes. Sorry, Councilmember Ramos.
Thank you. I missed that the refund request fee was not in the staff recommendations, and maybe this is more on the administrative side, but I do support the alternative proposal where you charge the rebate request fee on open accounts, but not on closed accounts.
Excellent. At this point, I think those 3 options that we presented is what we'll be implementing, since I haven't heard any contrary feedback from council.
Thank you.
Thank you. And I believe that concludes item 8B, and we are adjourned. Thank you.